Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome. My name is Juliette McCullough, and I'm the chair-elect of the Admiralty and Maritime Law Committee of ABA TIPS. I'm really honored this morning, it's morning where I am, to be able to welcome you to this roundtable discussion on racial diversity and inclusion in the maritime industry. On behalf of the Admiralty and Maritime Law Committee, we sincerely thank you for joining us for this crucial conversation with some of our esteemed industry members. The Admiralty and Maritime Law Committee is deeply committed to diversity in its membership and in its leadership. If you're not a member, we hope you'll consider joining us. And with that, I would like to pass the floor to Jeanne, our Diversity Vice Chair of the Admiralty and Maritime Law Committee.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Juliette. I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. As Juliette mentioned, my name is Jeanne. I'm a maritime practitioner in the law firm of Jones Walker in New Orleans, Louisiana. I also have the distinct honor of serving as this year's Diversity Vice Chair to the Admiralty and Maritime Law Committee. I'm humbled to be here today among our distinguished panelists to welcome you to a program that is truly the first of its kind. Today, we'll hear from 4 distinguished maritime attorneys. I'm looking forward to their stories, their guidance, and I'm extremely grateful for their willingness to share a piece of themselves and their time with us all here today. Over the course of the coming year, we're hoping to host more of these types of events. Each one may look a little bit different than this one. For example, we're already planning a similar event for early next year with women maritime attorneys and industry representatives. To all of you on the call today, I hope that you'll join our committee. But if you have any ideas about any further future diversity and inclusivity programming in the maritime space, please feel free to contact me. To be clear though, the goal of each of these programs, no matter how they look or the members that are comprised of, is the same. We want to elevate voices and personal stories in an effort to create change in our industry, to give people a platform to demonstrate how they have developed pathways to success, not only to serve as a model for those that come after them, but to shine a light on how we can all do better. This may be the first program, the starting point, that begins to bring to the forefront these necessary conversations that need to be had in our workplaces to ensure that we recruit and retain diverse candidates. But it cannot be our last. We must work hard to ensure that the pathways to success in our industry are clear, that the on-ramps are known and accessible to those who seek them, that we as industry leaders are doing everything we can to educate those around us and to empathize, and to ensure that the students coming out of law school during these difficult times know that a career in maritime law is a good one and a successful one. I'm so proud to say that I'm a part of this committee. As Juliette mentioned, the Admiralty and Maritime Law Committee has always embraced diversity by elevating women in the maritime community over the years to leadership positions. But I'm especially proud to be a part of this committee today to kick off a series of programming geared towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. Please stay tuned as we continue to develop and host these programs. I would be remiss if I did not say that this program has been made possible by our moderator and host, Chris Nolan. I've known Chris since I was in law school. He encouraged me to join in and get involved with the Admiralty and Maritime Law Committee. Chris is currently a leader in the Tort, Trial, and Insurance Practice section of the ABA. He's a former chair of the AMLC, and he's a partner at Holland and Knight in both their New York and Chicago offices. And with that, I just want to say an enormous thank you to our panelists today for your willingness to join and to participate in this program. I'm happy to pass the mic over to Chris to get us started. I look forward to seeing you all at upcoming events, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to welcome you all to the program.
All right. Thanks, Jeanne, for getting us started, and Juliette for that welcome. Jeanne's doing a fantastic job as a Diversity Vice Chair, pressing on all of us to make a difference with the informative programming such as this. You know, as Jeanne said, the goal of this program today is not only to inform, but to inspire action. You know, we're blessed with a very large megaphone at the ABA, and dedicated members who know how to market and use social media to get the word out to law students and young lawyers and decision makers at law firms and maritime companies to hear this message as to what the industry can do to recruit and retain Black and brown lawyers. It's a topic we haven't discussed before, and we want to jump right in. For the 100 industry folks who've RSVP'd, the reporters at Tradewinds and Lloyd's List, and many more who will listen to the recording on the ABA webpage and YouTube, you're in for a treat. When we were discussing this program and bringing it together, I thought of 4 lawyers who have experience in government, marine insurance, small firms, large firms, and I'm grateful when I called them, we went 4 for 4 in getting commitments for this roundtable. Now, usually as a moderator, I'd introduce the panelists and wax poetic about their LinkedIn greatness, but not today. A key component of the Racial and Diversity Inclusiveness Roundtable is appreciating the paths that our 4 panelists took to be on this Zoom platform today. From a deckhand on the Staten Island ferry to playing the role of Jay-Z in an enchanting Norwegian town at the annual members meeting for the largest marine insurer in the world, we've got it all covered, trust me. So without further ado, please welcome David McNeal. David, why don't you wave? Owner of the McNeal Law Group and a valued committee vice chair who lives in Houston. Kunbi Sowunmi, the senior claims advisor for charters and traders at Gard North America, Kunbi. And right now, my birth borough of Brooklyn, New York, Michael Razeeq, the legal counsel for IT and Digitalization at Shell Oil Company in Houston, Michael. And last but not least, Wayne Parker, president and CEO of Blue Water Law Firm in California. I've had the pleasure of practicing with Wayne only about a decade ago, and Michael much more recently. I didn't think you'd leave our firm so quickly after we invited you to Admiralty Disruption in New Orleans, Michael. But you're forgiven, and we'll let you pivot to the first topic and start. So why don't you lead off our discussion of your path to the maritime industry and being here today. Michael?
Well, I'm still here and still interested in maritime law.
Good.
And growing up in Kentucky, I knew probably next to nothing about maritime law or the maritime industry. And I think maybe a family cruise was probably the extent of my exposure until undergrad when I took an international law course. And one component of that was maritime law.
Just in terms of my background prior to joining Gard, as I said, I trained in the UK and I went to the University of Wolverhampton. In the UK, a law degree is an undergrad degree, as opposed to the US where it's a postgrad degree. It's a 3-year course. I did a year in the States as part of an exchange program at the University of Akron in Ohio on the JD program. Returned to the UK and completed my course, and then I did a year at what we call law school. Law school is where you have your practical experience for a year, and then you join a law firm and get 2 years training. Between law school and joining the firm that I trained at, I did a year at the London School of Economics. I did an LLM program in international law and media studies. Worked at the law firms. I worked at 3 law firms in the UK, basically in the field of international trade and shipping, doing litigation and arbitration. After 12 years, I took a career break for 6 months and traveled the world, which most people don't do in the middle of their career, but I think it was the best thing I ever did. And I decided to go into industry. I worked for 4 years with BHP Billiton, the largest mining company in the world, looking after their physical and paper trading contracts. I looked after the shipping team, which moved their products. And then I returned to the UK, joined Gard, and the story continues. That's me in a nutshell.
That is. You don't want to admit if you impersonated Jay-Z, do you, Kunbi?
I may be. You could Google it.
Okay, moving on to our next speaker, Wayne Parker. Wayne, take it away.
Thank you, Chris. And I'd like to thank everybody on the ABA Admiralty Committee for allowing me to speak today. I'm deeply honored and very flattered to be called a distinguished maritime attorney. I don't think myself that way. I don't know if I'm distinguished, but I thank you, everyone. I currently have my own law firm based out of San Francisco, although I am living in Truckee, California, but it's based out of San Francisco, the Blue Water Law Firm. I'm going solo practice in large part because I've always wanted to be my own boss. I was fortunate enough to work with Chris at Holland & Knight from 2003 to 2007 when I was just starting out as a maritime attorney. At that time, and Chris and others among you may already know, the Holland & Knight Maritime Group was really the progeny of the old Haight Gardner law firm, an old maritime firm that had been around for decades, I think over a century, before they merged into Holland & Knight. Worked with some great professionals, outstanding partners and senior associates, as well as people like Chris. Learned the ins and outs of all the sort of specialized litigation that occurs in the maritime industry in the U.S. courts, almost entirely within the federal court system. Decided that I really would rather do transactional work, and was fortunate enough that another law firm right there in Lower Manhattan, Seward and Kissel, they were looking for somebody who was an actual maritime lawyer to come over and help with their transportation finance group. And so in April of 2007, I left Holland & Knight to go there, did the shipping finance, which was pretty much all we did in our particular group, was represent lenders and investors in very complex, usually asset-backed transactions to fund purchases of oil tankers, container vessels, offshore drill vessels, etc. That was good for the first 2 years, and then the Great Recession ruined all that. The lesson there is transaction practice is great until there's a bad recession, and then, work drops off. Did a short time with a small law firm out in Long Island that specialized in, of all things, criminal defense of tanker companies, tanker operators, and mariners who were accused of environmental law violations by the U.S. Coast Guard. And then through my Holland & Knight contacts, I was lucky enough to be told about and apply for a position with Horizon Lines, which at the time was the largest of the Jones Act container trading companies in the United States. Moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, which is where they were based. Spent 4 years with them doing everything under the sun related to running a maritime company and providing legal advice on a host of issues, some of which I was not an expert on and had to become an expert on. We then merged or were bought by a competitor, Matson Navigation. Matson's law department extended me an offer in May of 2015 after the merger was consummated. And I moved back out to California, where I had to take the California bar, and worked with Matson for about 3 years. Left Matson in 2018, worked the next year with an energy company called Calpine. They specialize in generating electricity. Most of their plants are natural gas powered, but this particular project I was hired for was with respect to the wind energy portfolio they had, a very extensive planned onshore wind portfolio. That was great work for 11 months until they decided to sell the portfolio. And since then, I worked with Cooley LLP as an ethics and client contract attorney. Just my luck, I started working a week before COVID hit, so that job went away after 6 months, and decided, you know what, let me go ahead and start my firm. My pre-law background, just to round it off, Naval Academy, graduated in 1990, commissioned in the Marine Corps, and for all, if any fellow Marines are out there, happy birthday and Semper Fi. Finished up my Marine Corps time in 96, took the Foreign Service Officer exam, went to State Department, went through Chinese language study, served in Taiwan and China, and then came back to the States for law school. So I've had a great background in both the in-house side of the maritime industry, as well as law firms that cater specifically to the maritime industry. Thank you.
That's great, Wayne, and that background flavor, is important. So because we have so many law students that have joined us, to understand that the paths take a few turns. That leads perfectly into David McNeal. David, why don't you tell us about your path?
Thanks, Chris, and thank you to the Admiralty Law Committee and the American Bar Association for allowing me this opportunity to be here with you all today. And like Wayne said, happy birthday to the Marine Corps. So my background is a little bit different. Of course, we all have different backgrounds, and that's what makes us strong, is the diversity of our backgrounds, where we come from. I grew up in a military family. My dad was in the Air Force, so I spent 10 years overseas by the time I was 12 years old. I came to San Antonio, where I grew up and went to middle school and high school, sort of put all my eggs in an athletic basket, which did not pan out after high school. And so I was around San Antonio for a couple of years trying to get into a military service academy, specifically the Air Force Academy, because that was the environment that I was around. And so after not getting in the first year and then attempting again in the second year and being told that while I sounded like a great candidate, that, you know, I just didn't have the 1,450, 1,500 SAT scores to be competitive because I was already out of high school. So I remember walking out of that room, hearing that news and getting a tap on the shoulder where somebody asked me, "Have you ever heard of the United States Merchant Marine Academy?" And I said, "No, but I wanted to know if they had a football team." And he said that they did have a football team. And so my interest then in the Merchant Marine that was the spark, I guess you'll say. I then went to the United States Merchant Marine Academy, where I graduated from in 2004, received my Merchant Mariner's license as a third mate to operate vessels of commercial of any size upon oceans. But I received a job offer in San Diego, and that seemed very appealing to me for numerous reasons. I was going to be building ships out at NASCO, National Steel and Shipbuilding Company. I went there for about a year and realized after that period of time that I didn't believe that shipbuilding was for me, and I wanted to use my license that I had earned at the academy in some capacity. So I moved from San Antonio back to New York. I worked on the Staten Island Ferry as a mate, a ship's officer for 3 years. And it was during that period of time that I made the decision that I was not going to continue working on the ferry for an entire career, and I needed to find a way to use the skills and the talents that I had not only been blessed with, but that I had been able to develop through a lot of the training at the Merchant Marine Academy and military training as well in some capacity. And I decided that law school was the avenue, and that maritime law specifically was what I wanted to go and do. So I applied to Tulane University because they have as Michael mentioned, a renowned maritime law program, earned my certificate of specialization in maritime law. My plan actually was to go into the Marine Corps as a staff judge advocate. I had switched from the Navy Reserves to the Marine Corps Reserves just before starting law school, and I served in the 4th Marine Division during my time in law school in New Orleans. But as the saying goes, we make plans and God laughs. And at the end of law school, my wife and I had our first son about a month afterwards. And so that put a little bit of the wrench in the plans. And I said, well, I can't exactly continue my legal career quite this moment because I have other responsibilities to take care of. And that actually brought me right back to the Merchant Marines. So I fell back on my license. I began to work in the Gulf of Mexico on an offshore supply vessel, also worked on a drilling rig, a semi-submersible drilling rig in the Gulf of Mexico, and then eventually came back on shore. I still needed to work. I worked for a company called Bechtel, which many of you I'm sure know. Bechtel is the largest private civil engineering firm in the country. They built the Hoover Dam in the 1930s, and I was doing some vessel chartering for them. So I was still able to be in the maritime industry somewhat, learning about how the business of chartering is actually conducted. I did that for a few years, and it was while I was working there that I took the bar exam, the Texas bar exam, and passed the bar exam and received my license. I opened up my firm in the beginning of 2016 with the goal of representing mariners. My experience in working in numerous different environment, ships, offshore supply vessels, drilling rigs, allowed me to see that, yes, there is diversity out there, but for the individuals who are Black and brown skinned, many of them are in positions where they can get hurt for numerous different reasons. And I felt like that there wasn't many people who looked like them to represent them. There certainly are people, but I didn't see that many. And I wanted to be a help to those individuals specifically. And so that was the goal of my law firm. So I opened up in 2016, and I'm now the owner of McNeal Law Group at hurtworkingoffshore.com.
That's great, David. So many of us, me in particular, learned at Little League that my sports skills would not get me to center field for the New York Mets. So you have to pivot at different points in your life. One of the things we want to kick off of discussing now as we turn to our topics, with that background of how so many people how our four speakers got to this place today, is what can we do as an industry, to attract more women and minorities throughout the industry. I add women because we're actually kicking this off with one of the questions that we received as we solicited from our attendees certain topics that they'd be interested in. And we thought we'd just dive right in. And to facilitate it, Michael and Wayne are going to chat. So Michael, Wayne, what can the industry do to attract more women and minorities in our maritime industry?
Chris, one thing that I think would be helpful in how we frame this is distinguishing between the practice of maritime law and the general industry. And I'll talk a little bit more about maritime law, and I'm sure Wayne has some good ideas for both. And just thinking about my own background, if I hadn't have taken an international law course as an undergrad at the University of Louisville, maritime law wouldn't have been on my radar. So I think having that sort of early engagement with students, especially in areas that may not be traditional maritime law centers, is really helpful. And that engagement can come from law firms, can come from companies, it can come from organizations like the ABA. And then in law school, I think I was fortunate that Tulane had a great maritime law program, but if I had gone to, for example, if I had stayed at the University of Louisville for law school, then similarly, I wouldn't have had that same exposure to maritime law. So both at the undergrad level and then at the law school level, I think there's an opportunity for more engagement with a broader range of schools to introduce more women and minorities to maritime law. And then I think law firms in particular are in sort of a unique situation, because I think that one thing that law firms can take advantage of is the current diversity of the workforces that they have, because there are a number of women and minority attorneys at law firms that may be in the corporate practices or in the litigation practices that may not be dedicated to maritime law. But I think there is definitely an opportunity for existing law firms to utilize those associates and senior associates to help staff maritime matters, to give people more exposure to that. But I think it's something that has to be purposeful, but I think that with a combination of efforts from firms and companies, from schools, and then organizations like the ABA, then I think those sorts of advancements can be made.
I think Michael made several outstanding points, and I think the very first one he made is the biggest challenge in the maritime industry with regard to minority and female recruitment, or just recruitment in general, and that is, it is an industry that those of us in it know it's not an industry that most people understand exists. They know in the abstract that it exists, but they don't think of it as a career prospect. And that's regardless of race, ethnicity, or gender. Then you have the added challenge that, and it's still the case today, most of your minority, and I would say probably most of your female law students, they're the first generation to go to law school, maybe even to college, but usually law school. And so there's a tendency for people who are the first in their families to go to law school to figure they want to go to a place to practice law where, the two priorities are they'll love the work that they'll do and they'll be well compensated for it. And if you look at popular entertainment, popular media images of the law profession, which is admittedly is where most people get their ideas about the legal industry, the the maritime industry is never named. So I think for the industry, a big part of the challenge is they have to make the average person aware that there's this huge and very satisfying industry to work in. And then with regard to, say, minorities and women, they need to, couple that message with, and oh, by the way, we do pretty much from a legal standpoint, and in many ways, from an operational standpoint, the same kind of work and provide the same kind of services to the economy and to the world as you would do anywhere else. And you can make a very comfortable living and have a very satisfying career here. But they have to, the message has to get out. And unfortunately, the industry now tends to be trapped in these old-fashioned ways of recruiting talent, which is on the mariner side, you go to certain academies and schools that specialize in pushing out mariners. David went to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. And fortunately, over time, more minorities and women have started to go to that fine institution. But when I went to the Naval Academy in the 1980s, blacks constituted, male and female, at the Naval Academy, less than, I think, 3% of our class. It's since risen to about 9%. And that's a great, accomplishment. But that's the kind of progress that we have to see at an educational level. And then it was because I was going to the Naval Academy and involved in things at sea and then international stuff as a State Department officer, I just, on an individual personal level, was like, yeah, I'd like to go to law school and learn this maritime stuff. But many law students, as I said earlier, don't even know it exists. So the industry needs to do a better job at getting out there and making people aware it exists and that it's a great place to come work. And I think there's a lot of potential with regard to female and minority attorneys in this industry, because the fact is most people don't know about it. So it's kind of like, hey, this is actually one of the best kept secrets out there. You can come into the maritime industry and, not for specifically the legal industry alone, but, come into the industry. And, I was an associate general counsel at Horizon Lines with 8 years of legal practice under my belt. Had we not merged, I probably would have been the deputy general counsel by now. That's the way things oftentimes happen. The cruise sector, as we'll talk about later, and I'm going to stop at this point, has done better than, say, the container or the tanker sectors of the maritime industry with minority and female recruitment. There are a lot of complex reasons for that, but if as an example, if you go to Carnival Cruise Lines and you look at their executive management team, their general counsel and secretary is Hispanic. Their deputy general counsel is Hispanic. And there are several other minorities and women in the senior executive management team. And that's not unusual. So, and Carnival is not a company that's having a problem making money other than maybe because of the COVID-related issues these last 9 to 10 months. So I throw that out there.
Right. So Wayne, messaging matters, as we have with our law students there, and looking at the perspective, it's not your issues happening in a dock. It's the transportation, infrastructure, logistics, network of issues that you could be working on. When we have a vaccine for this COVID-19 scourge, getting that vaccine from point A to point B and around the world will involve air, sea, and logistics issues. And it's all part of the work that we do. And from that recruitment and working on the messaging, we want to take it to our next topic, which is retention. Once you do get qualified Black and brown lawyers who are interested and engaged in this area of law, how do we keep them involved? And David and Kunbi are going to lead our discussion on that. Gents?
Do you want me to go first, David, or do you want to go?
Sure,
first?
yes, please, solicitor, go ahead.
Great. So, look, I think that representation matters. We've just elected a first female Black vice president, and I can't tell you what wonders that's going to do for young girls and boys who look up just like they did with Barack Obama and see what's possible. I mean, I was fortunate enough to grow up in Nigeria. I'm British Nigerian, so born in the UK, but I spent my formative years in Nigeria. My parents were professionals. Everyone that I saw in positions of power and influence looked like me. So I knew what was possible. I mean, I grew up in an era where you either became a doctor or you became a lawyer. I was terrible at the sciences, so I became a lawyer. So when I moved to the UK at 16 to carry on my education, when I was being told by certain career advisors that, perhaps I ought to sort of temper my aspirations and maybe I ought to consider something other than the law because it was difficult to get into good colleges and to get a place, I just simply wasn't deterred. Now, when it comes to the issue of recruitment and retention, I think that companies have to be intentional. Companies need to be intentional in recruitment, in retention, and in advancement of ethnic minorities within their organization. Now, it's often said, and people say this a lot, and it bothers me when people say they don't see color. First of all, I just don't believe that that's true. If you don't see color, then what are you looking at? And I think people say when you see color, people think it's got negative connotations, which is not the case. Melody Hobson, who is the CEO of Ariel Investment. She's an African-American woman, and she's one of, I believe, only 5 Black CEOs in the top 500 companies in the US. I gave a TED talk, and I urge you to watch that. It's excellent. It's entitled Being Color Brave. And the upshot of her talk was that companies need to be color brave. Companies need to they need to look for color, because if you don't see color, if you don't look for color, then you miss opportunities within your organization where this is missing, and opportunities to enhance your organization by bringing in a different perspective to make the workplace more multifaceted and to make the workplace more dynamic. I mean, look, who likes a bowl of M&Ms that look and taste exactly the same? So I think companies need to be intentional. When you're recruiting, what are you doing? In the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement and the murder of George Floyd, I don't think we need to sugarcoat what actually happened. Most organizations have come out and said they are making a commitment to address the issue of systematic racism in organizations and in the workplace. But companies need to be intentional. You can't just simply pay lip service to this. You need to actually take active steps to do that. I mean, I was dismayed to read a couple of months ago that the CEO of Wells Fargo said that he had difficulties finding Black talent to fill places in his organization. I mean, in 2020, begs the question is, where are you looking? I mean, are you simply looking within your own network? Are you casting your net wider? Are you taking proactive steps? And examples of proactive steps that organizations could take is, when you're recruiting, are you saying to your recruitment consultant, I need you to bring me the best candidates, and the best candidates need to also include ethnic minorities. Because the question of what is the best candidate cannot just simply be people who look like you, who have similar experiences. It has to be wider, because when you cast the net wider, you're bringing in a different perspective, and your organization will reflect the communities that we serve. So you get these people into the organization. What is being done? What is being done to retain them? What is being done to ensure that they advance? Now you need to ask yourself the question, do you have diversity and sensitivity training within your organization to ensure that ethnic minorities feel welcome, they feel valued? Are you setting targets? Are you setting targets that we need to have a certain number of ethnic minorities and we need to advance them throughout the organization? Do you have mentors? I mean, and I'll go on to talk about this when we talk about mentoring. I have benefited from mentors all my life. Do you have mentors that can help people to navigate the culture of the environment and to navigate professionally? So I think those are the sort of things that companies need to be thinking about. I mean, at the end of the day, companies invest. You invest time, you invest money in training personnel, and if personnel leave because they don't feel valued, then that's simply a waste of your resources. So it just doesn't make any business sense. Over to you.
Yeah, I think I would add to that, and I support everything that Kunbi said. And there's one thing I think that that Wayne also mentioned that I think is true, that we also have to realize that this industry in and of itself is, like Wayne said, it's the best kept secret, right? So that was actually something that the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy would state. It's the best kept secret because it's an industry that not many people know about. So if you will, it's not on many people's radar when they're coming out of high school or coming even in college as something that they are planning to go and do. But on the other end, while it's not the most popular industry, it's one of the most influential industries that exist in the United States and really in the world, because the commerce that is created by the industry affects all of us. I'm sure if all of us were to look down at our shirt, our pants, our socks, none of them would be made in the United States, more than likely. And they didn't get flown over here on the plane. More than likely, they came over here on a vessel. And people just don't realize that the maritime industry literally affects just about everything that has to do with our economy. So the first step is certainly letting people know that. And now if you're going to talk about minorities against the general public, the minorities are generally going to get information a little bit later than what they otherwise would. And so that means that they are considering that either not at all, not knowing it exists, and not seeing it as an opportunity for them. So I think that a way to retain, if you will, as Chris had asked, is by pitching Maritime as a mentorship situation. Maritime for mentorship, maritime law being a way to mentor the law students. Because as we know, most people nowadays, and maybe this was different for generations in the past, but most people nowadays are not staying at the same job, at the same firm, or at the same location for an entire career. And so if we can pitch, and we can use so many maritime examples about this, because if you would just imagine that you are basically a ship, and your career is a journey, and it's a voyage, and what is the cargo that you have on your vessel that could tell you where it is that you want to go with your career. I can tell you for certain, and I think most people can tell you the same, that you don't necessarily know right out of law school exactly what you're going to do, which is why there's changes that are going to come that you did not necessarily anticipate. And with that being the case, if we can use Maritime as a way to mentor, I mentor students at Tulane Law School, and I'm happy to do it. It's one of the things that I take the most joy in, is talking to them about their thought process while they're in law school and beyond. And I say that to say that if we can use maritime law not as the end of, not as the destination, but as maybe the launch point, that you will receive mentorship about what you truly want to do in your career, what you truly have, what cargo you truly have on your vessel, and where the best location is for you to go. I think that's a very attractive thing we could create for the maritime law students, because there's not a whole lot of that goes on traditionally in law firms. So I think that we can use that advantage to law students to say, hey, we know that this doesn't have to be your end destination. It just can be your starting point. And while you're here, we can talk about and actually, use and utilize what your skills are. We can find out what they truly are outside of a law school environment to develop your career, because we all want to be in a place where we can progress. The same reason that I left the Staten Island Ferry was because I didn't see myself sitting in that pilot house all day long. I wanted to be down as a mate around the people. Well, that meant that I didn't want to progress, so I knew I needed to go somewhere where I wanted to progress. And I think if you don't have the ability, capability, or thought process that you can or want to progress, then there's less of an incentive to be there.
And David, let's drill down on that point, because in this next session, we're going to go individually to our panelists to talk about something that's passionate for them. And one of our questions that came in hits on that that point on the Staten Island Ferry. Why do you think the majority of seafarers and onshore employees in white-collar positions, from engineers to captains to CEOs, are made up of white men, while deckhands and other onboard employees are mostly minorities?
Well, there is the systemic part of the racism or the issue that we have in our country is that there are people who grow up in certain environments who are not exposed to other things less than other groups of people. And the thing about the maritime industry, at least one of the things, is that one, it's very old, and a lot of it is very family oriented. We know that there are a lot of major companies. Everybody knows about the big major ship owners and the big major drillers. But I would venture to say, and I don't know this as a fact, but the most concentrated group of maritime employment and the labor is in a lot of these smaller companies, a lot of the river boats, a lot of the tugboats. And there is just like anywhere else, you tend to hire somebody who's like you. You tend to bring somebody in who generally maybe knows the same people that you know. You feel like you have maybe known them on a basis other than employment. And so you feel like you know that individual. And I'm reading a book right now called The Color of Law. And it talks about how the United States in the early 1900s, through legislation, really the people of different colors were separated. And so when you're not around these types of the same type, when you're only around the same types of people you are much less likely, I think, to trust somebody who looks differently to bring them in. Now, I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, because we all know that that's the case. But there also is a resource that you need to become a little bit higher and to advance in a company. So if you have individuals in that company who are at the level that you're trying to get to, but they don't want to mentor you, as we talked about, Maritime for Mentor, they don't want to mentor you, they don't want to help you advance, you start to feel, because obviously you've got to make money, you've got a family to feed, you feel like you have to do something, you're already here, and if you can't go past this, then this is just what you've got. And I think that starts to be some of the reason why there's a difference. I mean, obviously, I worked as an officer on board different sorts of vessels, and there wasn't many people who I saw like myself in those positions. Many of the people who looked like myself were unlicensed oilers or deckhands, or like you said, not most of them were in the wheelhouse. Now, we are getting better. It is starting to change, and I think that's a good thing. But I think we also need to truly focus on it so that we can create the sort of diversity that we really want, because this is really one of the most diverse industries in the world and in the country.
And Dave, to that point, we were going to talk about another sector, the cruise sector, which seems to have a higher percentage of women and minorities in officer and management roles than in other maritime sectors. And Michael's going to talk about that in a moment. One of the comments that we received actually about diversity in other industries involved the offshore wind industry from our former chair, Lori Sands. She had mentioned that New Jersey is planning to build an offshore wind port in Paulsboro. It's the perfect opportunity to provide employment opportunities to a diverse community that lives near the anticipated port facility. There are other opportunities for employment of diverse individuals in the supply line and construction and operation and maintenance of wind turbines. That's a growing area we'll be looking for. But for the moment, the cruise industry, which is focused on diversity, has a better record than others. And Michael, why don't you tackle that on why you think they've made progressions there?
Sure. And Chris, just like you were talking about, I think as opportunities like that come up, I think looking for more minority and female attorneys or staff within the maritime industry has to be purposeful. And I think that cruise lines have been purposeful about it. And I think there are probably a number of factors, but I think a couple that stand out to me as to why that is. With one being the investor base of a lot of cruise companies, looking for corporate social responsibility, because the cruise lines have that accountability to their investors, whereas some smaller companies, maybe privately held or family-owned companies, may not have those same drivers, just like David was talking about. And I think Wayne touched on this a little bit as well with respect to cruise lines, but they also have a very diverse customer base. The cruise lines serve probably a few tens of millions of customers globally. And in order to better relate to their customers, to solve some of the problems that such a diverse customer base has, then it benefits the cruise industry to have employees and to have leadership that's also diverse, that can understand and relate to their customer base to come up with different creative solutions to solve some of those problems. So I think those are just a couple of the factors that I see as some of the bigger reasons why the cruise industry may be further ahead than other parts of the maritime industry when it comes to advancing diversity.
Thanks for that, Michael. And when we have other areas of our maritime industry advance and have more diverse voices in boardrooms and courtrooms, the role of role models and being flexible to address a workplace and sometimes the politics of work is important. Kunbi, you touched on this before about the role models have placed. Why don't you lead this discussion for us? Once you take yourself off mute.
Sorry about that.
There you are.
Yeah, look, I can't overemphasize the importance of having mentors and allies in the workplace to help you navigate, not only to train you professionally, but also to help you navigate the culture of the workplace. When I started off nearly 30 years ago, the firm I joined had been around in some form for over 100 years, and I believe that I was the first Black trainee that they had. There were very few ethnic minority partners in law firms, let alone marine law firms. But I'm glad to say that things have changed. I mean, I see heads of departments, I see heads of firms, ethnic minorities, and that's great. I see a lot more ethnic minorities in the profession. Whilst I didn't have any ethnic minority role models growing up, what I have benefited from is a bevy of women lawyers who have basically been the backbone of my career. My first 12 years in private practice, I worked for the same partner who was one of only 2 female equity partners at the time in our first law firm. And I basically learned my chops from her. I worked with her for 12 years. When she was on maternity leave, I basically ran her practice. And she was very welcoming. She allowed me access to her clients and basically told me to, it was time to fly the nest and to grow from that. And she had actually worked in industry before and recognized my skills. And she was actually one of the people that encouraged me to actually, she said, look, I think you will be great in industry, and encouraged me to try that out. When I worked at BHP, I reported to a woman. And at Gard, I was hired by a woman who is one of the heads of one of the claims processes in the organization. Until recently, I reported to the heads of charter trader claim, who was a woman. The managing director of Gard's office was a woman, and they were just so supportive. They were so supportive in terms of my career advancement, but also in just helping you to understand the culture of the organization and how to navigate that. And that is essential. You really need mentors, you need allies, you need people to prop you up and help you get to your destination. And I just can't overemphasize how important that is.
Thank you for that, Kunbi. And it leads us to sort of the consequences if we don't do this. The consequences of not having a workforce that's diverse on sea and on land are calculable. And for that, Wayne has a few points and considerations. Wayne?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I would say that, I don't think anybody in this day and age, regardless of the politics and the tensions of the last year is going to deny what has been a trend for 40 years, 40 or 50 years. And that is, as the world becomes more globalized, successful businesses have to understand that they're not just selling whatever it is they sell to economies in Europe and North America. China's economy is the second largest in the world. It's projected to become the largest in about 20 or 30 years. India's economy is also, if you've been to India, say 30 years ago, and you go to India now, that economy is also grown by leaps and bounds. Standards of living have increased. Consumption is up. And in fact, one of the biggest trends in the maritime industry from a demographic standpoint is the increasing number of South Asians that you see in the industry. And I think that the smarter ocean carriers and maritime enterprises see this and understand, it's not just, hey, I want to exploit cheap Indian labor. It's, hey, I think we have to face the reality that going forward, we can't just rely on the old pipeline of Scandinavian and English mariners to man our vessels. We have to be prepared to have more, just, from a mariner standpoint, more mariners who are non-white. And inevitably, as you get that demographic shift, there's going to be a percolating effect upward. On the mentoring side, though, this is where mentoring really needs to happen, though, because you want, again, for business reasons, you don't want to lose trained people. An academy teaches people certain basics about how to operate a vessel. But I think David and anybody who has served at sea knows you really learn how to operate a vessel and operate it commercially in a viable way when you do the job. It's doing the job that is where you learn and get trained. And companies don't want to, if they're smart, they don't want to lose that talent. So I just think that, we have to convince companies that if you really want to succeed in the future, you have to be willing to disrupt your mindset about how you brought people in and who you mentored, especially in a changing world. And I would throw this out as an example of how somebody outside the industry forced to change. Everybody on this panel who's had time in industry has probably read or heard of a book called The Box, How the Container Changed the World. And the short history lesson is you have somebody who's a North Carolina trucker, who's a trucking magnate, Malcolm McLean. And it's Malcolm McLean who basically puts together the teams of individual specialists and smart people. It says in the 1950s, the old break bulk shipping model that's been the way shipping cargo has been done for thousands of years, it's no longer viable. And so through a complex system, basically designing a complex system based on the use of unitization, similar containers of similar sizes, you create this revolution in transportation, which makes it possible to have the modern day global economy. But it took an outsider to do that. It may or may not take somebody doing the same in the maritime industry, coming in and saying, if there's a potential talent pool out there in non-European countries, as well as Europeans with the willingness to come in and work this and say, hey, let's put together a team. There's market share to be had here in whatever subsector you want to talk about, offshore wind, offshore energy development of all kinds, container shipping, et cetera, et cetera. And that might be where you might find the impetus that forces change in the industry. An outsider comes in and says, I can do this better than the people whose families have done it for 4 or 5 generations, because they're not willing to change and accept the new world as it really is. That's my 2 cents on how that's likely to see, how we're likely to see change occur.
Thank you for that, Wayne. We had, while you were speaking, we had a question come in from Molly McCafferty, one of our glass ceiling breaking mediators here in the United States and now working at the American Club. And she had asked, how can organizations like the CMA, the Connecticut Maritime Association, their education foundation, more effectively partner with industry to better promote these opportunities? We continue to look beyond the service academies, but struggle to gain momentum that sort of ties us into a point we wanted to make at the end, which is to our decision makers on the call and being more proactive, as we've discussed on this now just about at the hour, that there's a chance to look in different places than we have before. And to that end, we're pleased to have Marla Dickerson on the line with us from the Southern University Law Center. And Marla can discuss a little about what she does, and maybe even give a shout out to Professor Hooks, who teaches maritime law at the SULC. Marla?
Hi, thank you, Chris. My name is Marla Dickerson. As Chris mentioned, I am Director of Continuing Legal Education at Southern University Law Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Also, I am Managing Fellow of our Cannabis Compliance Law and Policy Institute. I'm here because I also serve on a couple of the TIPS committees, one of them being co-chair of the Committee on Diversity and Inclusion. One of the things that I always like to do is to go out and promote the talent that we have at Southern University Law Center. Many of my students are on the call today, and we have both non-traditional students, students who may have not made the requisite GPA, requisite LSAT to get into schools that maybe people look at, but nonetheless still have the skill set, the desire, and the ability to work in different avenues. We have a Admiralty course at Southern University Law Center. One of the things I told Chris is every time I would pass by, it's in the evening, and I often work evenings being in academia. I would pass by, I would not see a lot of students, Black or brown students in the course, or women students who were in the course. And I think the panelists have done an excellent job explaining, why that may be, because of lack of information on the practice of maritime and admiralty, because of sometimes it being a cliquish type of niche in the field. But I want to offer Southern University as a potential pipeline for anyone who is interested in working with students who are diverse in every aspect that you can think of diversity in. And I'll be willing to work with you to build pipelines, to build bridges, to do what we need to do in order to make sure that we have not only diversity, but we build equity platforms and impactful inclusion in the maritime and admiralty industry.
Marla, thank you for that. We're going to send to all of our participants today your contact information to follow up. But for the folks who are going to be looking at this on YouTube later, can you provide your email address for folks to reach out?
Yes, my email address is mdickerson@sulc.edu, and that's M. You'll see my name, Dickerson, D as in David, ICKERSON, @sulc.edu, and that's Southern University Law Center. Also, the telephone number for the office is area code 225-771-2155. And let me start over with the country code, which is 1, area code 225-771-2155.
Marla, thanks so much for that. Marla was indispensable in getting the word out to HBCUs and trying to get law students to join our program today, so that we make some of those steps and do changes that give perspectives to the maritime industry that folks may not have looked at us before. We're very grateful for that. So as we wrap up in this hour about how the maritime industry can make meaningful steps to encourage racial diversity, equality, and inclusion of Black and brown voices, we've had a number of ideas that were raised about recruitment and retention and different industries which may be right for it. Mentoring and being there for folks who are looking for career changes matters as well. And besides Marla's contact information, I think we may get David and Kunbi and Michael and Wayne to be willing to share their email addresses, maybe even their primary email addresses to the folks who've signed up here. And we'll do that after our call, we'll send a message to everyone. I can't thank you enough for spending time to be with us for this hour. Take this message and let's do something to effectuate change, to intentionally make change, as we all hope. Thanks, everyone.